It was snowing in the north again, thick, heavy flakes falling like the sky itself was mourning. Atop the walls of Winterfell, Robb Stark stood motionless, his direwolf grey wind at his side, eyes fixed on the horizon. The letter from King's Landing trembled in his hand, not because of the cold, but because of what it carried. His father, Eddard Stark, Warden of the North, was dead, executed like a traitor, labelled a criminal, beheaded before the crowd, while his daughters were held hostage. It wasn't just injustice, it was humiliation, a message from the Lannisters that the honor of the North meant nothing in the South. Robb had not cried, not once, not in front of the men, but Catelyn had. And Arya was missing. The great hall was silent when Robb entered. Lords and bannermen turned as he strode in, still gripping the letter, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort sat near the high table, face pale, expression unreadable as always. Everyone expected him to say the words, to call the banners, to declare war. But instead, Robb threw the letter onto the table, letting the seal of the Iron Throne face up, soaked slightly from his snow-covered gloves. "They killed him," Robb said. "They killed my father." Whispers swept the hall like wind through bare branches. Lord Carstark swore loudly. Great Yonumber slammed his mug on the table. But it was Roose Bolton who stood first. "They made a mistake," Roose said quietly. "They thought the North would break. But they don't know the North." Everyone fell silent. Even Grey Wind let out a low growl. "We are not like the South," Bolton continued, stepping into the center of the hall. "We do not forget. We do not forgive. We survive. And when the time comes, we flay those who wrong us." His words hung heavy in the air. Robb blinked. He had expected coldness from Roose, maybe even hesitation. But this was loyalty, fierce, burning, dangerous. Catelyn, watching from the corner, narrowed her eyes. She had never trusted Roose Bolton, but something had shifted. Maybe the death of Ned Stark had stirred something in the cold Lord of the Dreadfort, something older than politics. Some primal loyalty to the Stark bloodline. The North rose that night. Banners were called. Ravens flew. Fires were lit across keeps and castles, not just for war, but for unity. It was Roose who rode out personally to gather the eastern houses, including those hesitant to oppose the crown. With him rode his bastard Ramsay Snow, a man feared even in whispers. But Ramsay kept his violence leashed. For now, in weeks, the North marched. Over 20,000 men beneath the direwolf banner. But this time, Robb did not ride alone. Roose Bolton rode at his left, not just as a bannerman, but as a shadow, cold, calculating, always watching. Robb noticed how Roose whispered to him often, advising patience, suggesting movements that flanked instead of charged. Unlike the Umber Lords who thirsted for open battle, Bolton sought strategy. At first, Robb mistrusted it, until the first victory came, swift and precise. A Lannister scouting party, crushed in a night assault near the Twins. No losses. Clean, efficient. That was Lord Bolton's suggestion, Robb admitted to his mother. "I wanted to charge them at dawn. He said shadows fight better at night." Catelyn didn't smile. "Roose Bolton serves himself first, then the North. Remember that." But Robb was beginning to see things differently. Maybe, just maybe, there were men who did value order, who understood that vengeance wasn't wild. It was measured, delivered cold, like winter. It was Bolton who first suggested the possibility of alliance with the Freys, not for marriage, not yet, but to use the twins as a passage. And it was Roose who promised to keep Ramsay out of sight, so the Freys wouldn't be disturbed. Robb watched the way men listened to Roose, with fear, but also with respect. And strangely, Robb began to learn from him. How to outthink, not just outfight. How to use silence as a weapon. How to make decisions that felt like compromises, but were actually victories. Still, Robb never let his guard fully down, not around Roose. But when news came that Jaime Lannister was captured by Stark forces, it was Roose who offered to escort him back to Riverrun under heavy guard, rather than execute him. "A prisoner," he said, "is always worth more than a corpse." Robb nodded. "And if you had to choose, Lord Bolton, between vengeance and strategy?" Roose looked at him with those dead, pale eyes. "Why choose?" he said. Do it right and you get both. Robb didn't know whether to be afraid or impressed. Winter was coming, and for once the North would be ready. The war was no longer a whisper. It was thunder on the march. Robb Stark's army moved south, cutting through the Riverlands with the precision of a blade. Each victory added to his legend, the young wolf they called him. But behind the banners and cheers, the real foundation of the Northern war effort lay in something deeper than steel. Unity. Unlikely, fragile, but real. And that unity had a face, Roose Bolton. Robb had grown to rely on him more than he ever expected. Where Great John offered valor and Rickard Karstark brought fury, Roose brought silence, reason, and something colder, calculation. It unnerved many in the camp. Men called him the Leech Lord, whispered rumors of what he did in the Dreadfort. Some said his bastards skinned animals for sport. Others said he didn't bleed like other men. But none could deny that every move Roose advised had brought results. In the heart of camp, by firelight, Robb held counsel with his lords. A map of Westeros lay stretched across a wooden table. Catelyn sat beside him, her face tight with worry. Roose stood behind her, hands folded neatly. "We need Riverrun," Robb said. "My uncle is surrounded. If the Tullys fall, we lose our stronghold in the Riverlands. The Freys will open the gates of the Twins," Roose said calmly. "If we send the right message." "The right message being what?" Lord Umber barked. "Begging." Roose didn't flinch. "Respect. And leverage." Catelyn turned to him. "You know Lord Walder Frey. What does he want?" Roose raised one eyebrow. "He wants to be noticed. He's been ignored his entire life by greater houses. Make him feel like a kingmaker." Robb grimaced. "Marriage?" "Not yet," Roose replied. "Promise him honors, praise, make him feel irreplaceable. Then cross his bridge." That was how the pact with the Freys began, not with vows or love, but with carefully crafted flattery. Robb sent letters praising Lord Walder's wisdom, naming his daughters beauties of the realm, and offering seats for his sons in future councils. It was Roose who dictated every word, and Walder Frey, greedy for dignity, drank it like wine. The twins opened. By the time Robb reached Riverrun, the tides of war had shifted. The Lannisters were no longer laughing in their halls. They had underestimated the North, and that miscalculation had begun to cost them. Jaime Lannister, their golden lion, now sat in chains, and the Riverlands had begun to rally behind the wolf banner. But not all news was good. Rickard Karstark's sons had died, not in battle but ambushed by Lannister scouts. Rickard, blinded by grief, called for Jaime's head. "Let me kill him," he spat in Robb's tent. "Let the Kingslayer pay for the blood of my sons." Robb stood still. "Jaime is our hostage. If we kill him, my sisters die." Rickard slammed his fist on the table. "What about my sons, Robb?" "What about them?" It was Roose who stepped forward. "Your sons were soldiers, Lord Karstark. Mine were flayed by wildlings. You think you're the only man here who's lost blood." Rickard glared at him. "You speak of honor, Bolton. Don't insult us." "I speak of patience," Roose said coldly. "Vengeance is easy. Justice takes time. Kill Jaime, and we lose the war. Keep him, and we choose when this ends." The camp remained tense after that. Rickard rode off in anger. Some feared he might abandon the cause or worse, defect. But Robb sent Roose after him, not to threaten, but to reason. A day later they returned. Rickard's fury was dimmed, not gone, but buried. "What did you say to him?" Robb asked Roose that evening. "I reminded him of who his enemy is," Roose replied, "and what the Lannisters would do to the North if we turned on each other. It wasn't loyalty Roose demanded. It was discipline. And somehow it worked. As the army moved through the Riverlands, villages once burned by Lannisters were reclaimed. Refugees returned. The people began to chant Robb's name. They saw him not just as Ned Stark's son, but as the future king in the North. Not all believed, but enough did. Enough to keep marching. But with every mile south, a shadow followed them. Not from the Lannisters, but within. Because men like Roose Bolton did not ride for loyalty alone. They rode for position. And though he had not betrayed Robb, the thought of Roose's ambition lingered in the back of every mind. Even Robb's. One night beside the Trident, Robb sat by the fire with his mother.
"He hasn't turned on us," he said.
"Not like the stories said he would." Catelyn looked toward Rose's tent in the distance, dimly lit, always guarded. "Not yet," she said softly. Robb turned. "You still don't trust him?" She reached over and touched her son's hand. "Trust is earned, Robb, not given. And Roose Bolton is a man who watches, who waits, who chooses the winning side," Robb frowned. "He chose us, for now," she whispered. Storm clouds gathered over Harrenhal, and not just in the skies. The blackened, half-burnt fortress loomed like a scar on the Riverlands, a ruin cursed by dragonfire, now turned prison and command post by those who dared claim it. Robb Stark claimed it not with fire but with fear. The Lannisters had fled before his banners reached the gates. What they left behind was horror, flayed bodies, tortured small folk, and bones buried under ashes. Roose Bolton walked those halls without flinching. "This is no place for mercy," he said to Robb as they surveyed the carnage. "Only memory." Robb said nothing. His knuckles were white on the hilt of his sword. This war had already cost him more than he could bear. His father's head still haunted him at night. Now the faces of murdered villagers would join. Bolton offered to stay behind. "Let me take command of Harrenhal, my lord. It suits my methods. And I will bleed the truth from any man left behind by Tywin." Catelyn opposed it at once. "You would give him a castle? After what we've seen?" But Robb was tired of fighting every decision with hesitation. He's won us 3 battles. He's kept the Freys loyal. If anyone can make Harrenhal bleed information, it's him. So Roose stayed, and Harrenhal became his nest. From there, strange things began to happen. Scouts vanished. Spies were returned in pieces, not killed by Lannisters, but tortured into confessing first. Ravens flew from Harrenhal regularly, but never with full reports. Only short messages signed with Bolton's flayed man seal. Robb tried not to question it. He had bigger concerns. Word came that Stannis Baratheon had lost at Blackwater. King's Landing remained in Lannister hands. The south was not crumbling as fast as the north hoped. And with Renly dead, the Tyrells had joined with the Lions. Robb's war just became harder. Inside his war council, arguments boiled. Lord Karstark wanted to march on King's Landing. Greatjon demanded they sack Lannisport. Roose's absence left a gap, a quiet, strategic mind that had often calmed the noise. Robb wrote to him. The reply came days later, carried by a pale rider with a northern accent and sharp eyes. A single parchment. "Patience wins more than pride. Hold your position. The lion's tail is long, but its belly is soft. Let them bleed each other. When they're weak, we strike." Bolton Robb read it 3 times. "He's right," he said finally. "If we overreach now, we lose." But Catelyn grew more uneasy. "Why does Rose want us still? Who benefits if the war drags on?" Robb didn't have an answer. The war had changed them all, but none more than Rose. He had become something like a mirror to Robb, colder, sharper, and willing to do the things Robb couldn't. Still, the North held together. Even with Lord Karstark growing restless, even with Freys grumbling about delayed marriages, Robb kept command. His bannermen feared losing him more than they hungered for separate victories. One night, in camp near Riverrun, a letter arrived bearing the royal seal of King's Landing. Robb opened it in private, alone by torchlight. Inside was a message from Queen Regent Cersei Lannister. Smug, poisonous words. But what froze Robb's blood was the parchment attached. A drawing done in a child's hand. Sansa's, her name signed at the bottom, shaky but real. "Please, brother, I'm still alive." The letter made no threats. It didn't have to. Catelyn found him at dawn, pacing the riverbank. "She's still there," Robb said hollowly. "Sansa." Catelyn put her arms around him. "Then we fight smarter." He shook his head. "I thought this war would end fast. A few battles. Honor wins out. But nothing simple. Every decision costs something." That morning Robb called another war council. This time, he took command with a clarity they hadn't seen in weeks. "We don't move until we have full control of the Riverlands. I want the Blackwoods, Brackens, and Derrys flying wolf banners. If they refuse, we make examples." "Roose Bolton's way," said Lord Karstark, half mocking. "No," Robb said, "my way. But we use every tool we have." He wrote to Roose, asking for an updated report on Harrenhal. He also sent a raven to Howland Reed in the Neck, his father's oldest friend. requesting support. If the North was to survive, it had to be more than strong. It had to be united, calculating, and unbreakable. And for now, Roose Bolton remained part of that vision. But shadows deepened. In Harrenhal's ruined tower, Roose stood overlooking the battlefield where thousands had burned years ago. Beside him, silent and smiling, was Ramsay Snow, his bastard son, his blade in the dark. Ramsay smirked, eyeing the caged prisoners below. "Does the young wolf still trust us?" Roose didn't turn. He doesn't need to trust. He only needs to believe. Ramsay Snow was like a cold wind through the camp, silent, biting, and always unwelcome. No one knew when he had arrived at Harrenhal, only that once he did, strange things followed. Whispers ran through the ranks. Some said a northern scout had gone missing after speaking out against Roose. Others said Frey men had been disciplined by a masked rider with pale eyes and a flaying knife. No proof, no bodies, just fear and silence. And Roose? He said nothing, as if his bastard's arrival was just another tool, another sword, another shadow to cast. Robb Stark received the reports with a heavy heart. He had not yet met Ramsay face to face, but the stories were enough. Men described him with more dread than they spoke of Tywin Lannister. "He's not a soldier," Gratian muttered one night at the fire. "He's a sickness." And the Dreadfort let it grow. Even Karstark, often indifferent to cruelty, admitted, "If we're not careful, we'll trade one mad king for a mad bastard." Catelyn urged Robb to act. "Send him away," she said plainly. "Roose has done enough for our cause. Thank him, reward him, and send them both back to the north." But Robb hesitated. The war wasn't won. The Lannisters were regrouping, reinforced now by Tyrell gold and southern numbers. Every victory from here would be harder. And Roose, for all his coldness, had delivered results. Controlled chaos. "I need him," Robb said finally. Catelyn looked at him with tired eyes. Need is how rot begins. Still, Harrenhal remained in Bolton hands, and Ramsay stayed in the shadows. For now. Then came a summons from the twins. Lord Walder Frey, insulted by the delay in marriage arrangements and unimpressed by promises of titles, demanded Robb fulfill his end of their agreement. His daughter Roslyn was of age. The wedding would proceed, or the bridge would be closed. Robb was furious. "We're at war. He wants me to stop everything and wed his daughter while Lannisters regroup." "It's politics," Roose wrote back, "and Walder Frey only understands one language, flattery wrapped in fear." But Robb's heart had already complicated things. He had married Jane Westerling, quietly and against counsel, after she had nursed him through a grave wound during battle. The union was secret, but not for long. When Walder Frey heard, his rage echoed across the twins like thunder. He didn't send soldiers. He sent silence. And that silence threatened to split the North in two. Robb called a private council with his mother, his trusted bannerman, and for the first time in weeks, Roose Bolton, who had returned briefly from Harrenhal. Robb laid the truth bare. "I married Jane Westerling. I did it for love, and I did it without thinking." Roose didn't flinch. "Then you've insulted the most fragile man in Westeros." Greatjon scowled. "Let him cry. We don't need the twins." Roose turned slowly to face him. "If we lose the Freys, we lose the bridge. If we lose the bridge, we divide our forces. The Lannisters will pick us apart. This is not about a girl. It's about geography." Catelyn stepped forward. "Then we fix it. Offer the Freys something bigger than a marriage." Robb sighed. "He wants blood ties." "I broke that." Roose watched him carefully. "Then give him a replacement. One of your cousins. A brother." "Anyone with Stark blood." Robb frowned. "Bran and Rickon are too young. Jon Snow is at the wall." Roose's pale eyes narrowed. "Then we return to old traditions. The North marries not for love. It marries for survival." The proposal came swiftly. Edmure Tully, Robb's uncle, would marry Roslyn Frey in his place. A lesser offer, but one the Freys might accept if it came with enough gold and grovelling. Robb agreed. There was no other choice. Roose volunteered to send the message personally. "Let me speak to Walder. I understand men like him." Robb hesitated. "You'd go yourself?" Roose smiled faintly. "It's time someone reminded the Freys what the North can be, with or without their bridge. As Roose departed with a handful of riders, including Ramsay, the mood in the camp remained tense. Men whispered. Some feared betrayal, others feared Walder's wrath. Catelyn watched them go and turned to her son. "You're putting everything in the hands of the most dangerous man in your army." "I know," Robb said, "but he hasn't failed us yet." Catelyn stared at the road long after they vanished. "Even poison can be useful," she murmured, "if you don't drink it yourself." The twins rose like twin vultures over the river, stone towers dark with age and pride. Cold water rushed between them, swollen with spring melt, but colder still were the hearts behind the castle walls. Roose Bolton arrived at the gates with fewer than 20 men. Ramsay rode beside him in silence, wearing a half-smile that unsettled even his father's own guards. He hadn't spoken much during the ride south, only watched, always watched, like a predator waiting for permission to pounce. When they arrived, the Freys didn't come to greet them. No banners, no horns, just a slow creak of the gates, and the unsettling feeling that eyes were everywhere. Roose dismounted calmly, dusted snow from his cloak, and strode through the hallways of the twins like he owned them. Ramsay followed, head tilted, sniffing at the air like a dog catching scent. Lord Walder Frey waited in the high hall, slouched in his chair, flanked by a horde of squinting sons and nervous-looking daughters. His face looked like a corpse half-preserved by bitterness, but his eyes, sharp, suspicious, calculating. "Lord Bolton," Walder drawled, not bothering to stand. "I was expecting a king. Instead, I get a leech." Roose didn't smile. "And yet here we both are, alive, which is more than I can say for most who cross the Lannisters." Walder raised a bony hand. "Spare me the flattery. You're here to fix what the young wolf broke. Say your offer." Roose gave a respectful nod. "Edmure Tully marries your daughter Roslyn, with honors, gold, and gifts. Robb Stark sends his deepest apologies." "Apologies don't open legs," Walder snapped. "And they don't make sons." Ramsay chuckled from the shadows just once. The sound made two of Walder's grandsons shift uncomfortably. Roose stepped closer. "The North still needs this bridge, and you still need protection. If the war ends badly, do you think the Lannisters will honor you?" "You're a pawn, Walder." "Be a smart one." The insult landed, but Walder didn't lash out. Instead he smiled, thin, cruel. "I know what I am, and I know your king's made himself look weak. Love marriage without honor? He's a boy in a man's war." Roose leaned forward. "And boys die young, but the ones around them, they survive. Sometimes they rise higher than kings ever dreamed." It wasn't a threat. Not quite. But it lingered in the room like smoke. Walder's tone shifted. "You're not here just for marriage. You're sniffing like a dog, looking for cracks in the floor." Roose shrugged. "You speak plainly, Lord Frey, so let me be plain as well." He gestured toward Ramsay. "This is my bastard Ramsay, unpleasant but effective. If you wish to play games, know that I don't bring flowers to second meetings." Ramsay smiled wide, not kindly. "I like weddings," he said. Walder didn't respond immediately. He looked between the two, cold leech and grinning wolf. Then he let out a thin, wheezing laugh. "You're disgusting, both of you. But you understand me better than that boy king ever did." He leaned back in his chair. "Fine, Edmure will marry Roslyn. We'll host the wedding here, and I'll forgive the insult." Roose inclined his head. "Wise. But I want more," Walder added, eyes gleaming. "I want a place in the new order, not just bridges and bannermen. If your king falls, I want the next king to remember who held the gate." Roose's tone didn't change. "You'll have what you deserve." "Careful," Walder hissed. "I know when I'm being promised bones." Roose didn't flinch. "Better bones than ashes." That night the Freys feasted, pretending laughter while Roose sat unmoved at the high table, sipping slowly, never more than a few words at a time. Ramsay didn't speak. He watched. He noticed things no one else did, who filled whose cups, who looked away when Roose made eye contact, which guards had sweat on their palms. Back in their guest chamber, Ramsay finally broke the silence. "You trust them?" Roose poured wine into a silver cup, not looking up. "I don't need to." Ramsay stepped closer. "You could take this castle in one night. 20 good men." Roose's eyes lifted. "We're not at war with them." Ramsay grinned. Not yet. Roose set the cup down. Watch them. Learn them. If this alliance rots from within, I want to be the first to smell it. He stepped to the window, gazing out at the black river beneath the stars. Robb is still a boy. He trusts too easily, loves too openly. But the North doesn't need a hero. It needs survivors. Ramsay tilted his head. And if he doesn't survive? Roose's voice was like winter wind. Then someone else will. Someone colder. Back at Riverrun, the wedding announcement arrived under the seal of House Frey, and Robb Stark exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Edmure has agreed, Catelyn said, folding the parchment. He's not thrilled, but he'll do his duty. He always does, Robb muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. The Freys are satisfied? For now, she said, but you shouldn't mistake silence for loyalty. Walder Frey will never forget being insulted. And Roose Bolton, she hesitated. What about him? Catelyn sat, her voice low. You trust him more than you should. The man is frost beneath flesh. No heartbeat. No soul. Robb looked toward the open tent flap, where the northern banners flapped in the wind. And yet, he's delivered more than any man here. He's held Harrenhal. He's kept our enemies scattered. He's even calmed Karstark. For now, she repeated. But Robb didn't argue. He knew what his mother meant. He felt it too. The creeping sense that while Roose Bolton had not betrayed him, he had never truly stood beside him either. He stood behind, and that was always a dangerous place for a man like Roose. Still, there was no time to dwell. The army began moving toward the twins, preparing for the wedding that would seal the last major alliance needed to hold the Riverlands. As they marched, Robb met with Edmure Tully, who wore the expression of a man condemned rather than a groom. I don't even know what she looks like, Edmure grumbled. Roslyn is kind, Robb said. From what I hear. You've never met her either. Robb gave a small laugh. No, but sometimes duty comes before desire, Edmure snorted. Easy to say after you married for love, Robb stiffened. I broke the alliance. This is how we fix it. The truth was, even as they marched toward peace, Robb felt no ease. He couldn't explain it, but it wasn't just about Walder Frey or his pride. It was something deeper, a chill he couldn't shake. A sense that the war had changed course, and not in his favor. Ravens from the north brought grim news. Winterfell had been taken and burned, Bran and Rickon were presumed dead, and Theon Greyjoy had vanished. The Ironborn had seized the western coast, and the Bolton bastard Ramsay had been sent to retake the castle. That name again, Ramsay. Robb hadn't seen him, but men who had couldn't forget him. Stories of flaying, torture, twisted games. And yet Roose kept him close, used him, protected him. At a war council before crossing the river, Robb voiced his concerns. Roose has too much autonomy, he said. Harrenhal, now the twins, and Ramsay, he shouldn't command men. Not in my name. Karstark, arms crossed, offered a dry chuckle. But he gets results. Robb glared at him. So would Wildfire. Doesn't mean I hand it to children. Catelyn, sitting nearby, watched the young king wrestle with decisions that would break older men. You need to call Roose back, she said softly. Keep him close. Don't let him drift further into his own shadows. Robb nodded. After the wedding, the twins came into view a few days later. Crossing the bridge felt like walking into another world. Stone walls that leered, narrow hallways filled with quiet Freys, and the overwhelming scent of damp wood and meat. Lord Walder greeted them with a forced grin and bloodless warmth. We're honored to host you, Your Grace, he said, emphasizing the title with mock pride. And to mend the bonds between our great houses? Robb forced a smile. We're glad to be here. Roose Bolton arrived last, slipping into the great hall like fog through stone. He nodded to Robb, gave no smile, and offered no words beyond a bow. The hall was filled with food, firelight, and laughter, but none of it felt real. Robb could feel the tension humming in the floorboards. Ramsay was nowhere to be seen, but his absence was as loud as his presence might have been. The wedding proceeded without incident. Edmure's face twitched with unease as he stood beside Roslyn, who, to everyone's surprise, was young, pretty, and weeping through the vows. Catelyn watched from a high table. Her eyes scanned the room, never resting, never trusting. She noticed things others didn't. The number of guards, the position of crossbows along the gallery, the way Roose never touched his wine. After the feast, she pulled Robb aside. "Something's wrong." He tried to laugh it off. "It's Walder Frey. Everything feels wrong here." "No," she said, her voice low. "It's Roose. He's not drinking, not smiling, not even watching the bride." Robb hesitated. "You think he's waiting," she said. "For something. Or someone." They turned toward the high table. Roose was there, motionless, just watching everything. The music slowed. The feast was over, the marriage sealed, and still the hall held its breath. Rosalind Frey had been led away in tears. Edmure Tully was too drunk to notice, already carried to the wedding bed by grinning Frey cousins. The hall now thinned, not with peace, but with the eerie calm before a storm. Robb sat at the high table, sipping slowly, watching the firelight dance along the stone. His mother sat beside him, fingers clutched around her goblet, eyes darting across the room. The Frey guards had not left. They lingered at the doors, too many for celebration. And Roose Bolton hadn't moved in over an hour, still, silent, observing. Something was wrong. When the band began to play again, a slow, somber tune, not the song of victory, not the tune of joy, Catelyn stood. Robb turned. "Mother?" But she was already moving. Her feet carried her down the hall like a whisper of warning, past laughing Frey daughters, past drunk bannermen and slurred toasts. She stopped behind Roose, who was seated with his back to her. "Lord Bolton," she said quietly, "you haven't touched your wine." Rose didn't look up. "It doesn't suit me tonight." Catelyn's eyes flicked to his hands, pale, still gloved, still untouched. "I've known men who don't drink at weddings," she said. "They usually have steel under their cloaks." Rose turned slowly, pale eyes meeting hers like ice breaking over a riverbed. "There are some things I prefer to be ready for," he replied. Catelyn felt it then, not fear, not yet, but something worse, confirmation. She grabbed his arm, and her fingers touched chainmail. At the same time, the doors at the far end of the hall slammed shut. Bolts slid across. The band stopped playing. For a breath, no one moved. Then a crossbow twanged. A northern bannerman collapsed, bolt through his throat. Screams followed. More bolts, more blood, chaos. Catelyn's scream cut through it all. "Robb, get down!" Robb turned, saw the horror unfolding, and reached for his sword. Too late. Freys in wedding silks pulled blades from beneath their sleeves. Stark men stood and fell in the same moment, overwhelmed, confused, drunk, unarmed. Bolton didn't move. He sat still as the carnage erupted around him, wine now knocked over, blood pooling across the table. Robb tried to charge toward his mother, but two Frey guards blocked his path, blades drawn. Then finally Rose rose, and silence followed, not from peace, but from exhaustion and death. Robb stood alone in the center of the room, chest heaving, grey wind howling beyond the castle walls, trapped and surrounded. Catelyn's hands trembled. "Why?" she breathed. "Why, Rose?" Roose looked at her, then at Robb. "You were winning," he said, voice flat. "And that was a mistake." Robb spat blood. "You were with us. You marched with us," Rose nodded. "And you taught me something, that boys who wear crowns bleed just like beggars." From the corner, Ramsay stepped in, wiping a red blade with a cloth that once belonged to a Frey. His smile was wide, satisfied. Catelyn lunged for a dagger from a dead man's belt. "You'll die for this, both of you. The North will never follow you." Rose stared at her with cold, indifferent eyes. "The North follows power, not names. And you—" He looked at Robb. "Forgot that." Robb fell to one knee, blood soaking into the stones. He tried to speak, but choked on the weight of betrayal. Roose approached, slow and sure. "There can't be two kings," he said. Then he drove the dagger deep into Robb's heart. A clean strike, almost gentle. Catelyn screamed, loud, raw, breaking through her ribs. But no one stopped Rose, not one Frey, not one Bolton. Robb Stark fell, and the young wolf was gone. The hall was silent again, not from calm, from emptiness. Roose turned to Catelyn. "I advised him. I saved his life more times than I can count. But in the end, he was still his father's son. Too proud, too noble, too doomed." She stared at him, lips trembling. "You'll never be king." "I don't need to be," Rose said. "I just need to survive." He walked past her as if she were already dead, and somewhere beyond the castle walls, the howling of grey wind was cut short. The fires burned low in the aftermath of betrayal. The twins were quiet, save for the scraping of boots and the dragging of bodies. The feast hall that had once held music and laughter now reeked of blood and smoke. Northern banners were torn down, trampled beneath Frey feet. Robb Stark's crown lay on the floor, dented, smeared in his own blood. Catelyn Stark was gone. Her scream had lasted until her voice gave out. Some said she went mad before the end, clawing at her own face before a Frey blade silenced her. Others whispered she simply collapsed, soul already broken, before her throat was cut. Roose Bolton stood above it all, calm, still, unshaken. He had not smiled once. Not when the Freys laughed. Not when they toasted him. Not when they asked for Ramsay to lead the next campaign through the north. He merely watched, as if the slaughter were just another move in a long, cold game of strategy. Walder Frey strutted through the carnage like a proud crow. Well, that's that. The North's broken. Your bastard will mop up the rest. Rose didn't look at him. The North is never broken. It only waits. Walder blinked. You mean you rule now? Yes, Warden of the North? Roose turned to face him fully, his voice quiet but final. I rule until someone stronger comes. Walder scowled. Is that a threat? No, Roose said. It's a fact. Ramsay stood beside his father now, blood drying on his hands, the skinning knife sheathed at his side. His face was beaming, pleased as a child. But his eyes, those eyes were mad. I want Winterfell, Ramsay said. You'll take it, Roose replied finally. And you'll hold it. But do it clean, Ramsay laughed. There's no such thing. Rose didn't argue. He simply turned and walked out of the hall, past the bodies of the men he once marched beside, past Robb, past Catelyn, past all the hope the North once had. He had made his choice. Back in the North, the news took time to spread. When it did, it shattered everything. At White Harbour, Lord Manderley nearly declared war on House Bolton, but his ships were still repairing from Ironborn raids. At Bear Island, the Mormonts tore down the Stark banners and raised black flags in mourning. In the Dread Fort, Ramsay's men cheered and began preparing for blood. The North, once united by grief for Eddard Stark, now fractured under the weight of betrayal. Some bannermen pledged to Roose, most out of fear, not loyalty. Others fled into the woods, forming resistance bands. Stark loyalists, they called themselves, though there were no Starks left to follow, or so they thought. Far beyond the wall, Jon Snow stood atop the frozen ramparts of Castle Black, watching snow fall in silence. The raven came late, shivering, feathers stiff with frost. It carried no words, just a strip of parchment stained red. Jon didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the blood and knew what it meant. Robb was dead. Catelyn was gone. The North had been betrayed, and now only ghosts remained. He clenched the parchment in his fist, knuckles white. Sam found him that evening by the fire. Jon, I heard. I'm sorry. Jon didn't answer right away. Then finally, through clenched teeth, Roose Bolton did this. Sam nodded slowly. He was always dangerous. But now he has the Freys, the Lannisters. No, Jon interrupted. He has nothing. He just thinks he does. Sam hesitated. What will you do? Jon looked into the fire. What the North always does, remember. And in the dark something old stirred. Something that had slept in the bones of the North for centuries. A name, a bloodline. A vengeance too patient to die with kings. Elsewhere in the woods near the neck, ravens flew from Greywater Watch. Howland Reed, friend of Eddard Stark and keeper of old secrets, began sending messages of his own, not to lords, but to heirs, to those who still carried Stark blood in their veins. In the ruins of Winterfell, where snow blanketed ash and shattered stone, a banner fluttered again, a dire wolf, crudely stitched by trembling hands. Bran Stark was alive, hiding, watching, and in the silence that followed the slaughter of the Red Wedding, the North began to whisper. Not forgiveness, not fear, but something deeper. The North remembers. And Roose Bolton, warden in name but usurper in truth, sat in Harrenhal with maps and ledgers, unaware that his greatest mistake had not been betrayal. It had been letting anyone live.